What are plyometrics? How do you use them in your training? What are some things to avoid? What are our personal experiences with plyometrics? Today's all about plyos. Let's get into it. Um, I always start these with a question, John.
Which is great. It allows me to just not think about anything.
What were your first experiences with plyometrics?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this before you we hopped on the call and talked about it because I was like, damn, what is my lens on plyos right now and how has it changed? I think I still, looking back at my experience with them, probably to this day, my favorite coach is still Jim Radcliffe. I have been around the tippy top of the iceberg coaches in regards to plyos, sports performance, etc. And I don't know if it's that I saw so much performance improvement from doing that progression at that time and just like seeing its relevance and knowing how plyos work. I still think that the progression made a ton of sense. It developed a lot of different aspects and developed a lot of different tendons in a unique way. And I really, 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 to this day, that was my first experience with them. And I still strongly, strongly am in favor of that progression. At this point, like I said, there's not really anything that I haven't seen in regards to plyo progressions. I've seen the box progressions. I've seen Verkoshansky's progression. I've seen other track coaches and how they use bounding progressions and takeoff progressions and spurt progressions and all this stuff. And I think that Jim Radcliffe's progression is just makes a lot of sense. Like Vern Gambetta is like this old school, old head coach, and he has these, I think they're called Gambetta Athletic Initiative, something or another. I think it's called that, but it's like a conference every year, right? And Vern is an OG. Like he is standard old school S&C, but like good S&C. He knows a lot and has a lot of success, does the fundamentals incredibly well, and will always push the fundamentals. James is a good friend with him. Well, James, I think it's Jim. Maybe he goes by James, not sure. But he was at Oregon, and just the whole book that he wrote with, I don't know who, it was a bobsled coach. And at the time when I read it as a kid, I thought bobsled was like ridiculous. I was like, why would I care about like sliding down a hill? I come to find that there are some of the most explosive athletes in the world. So it made a lot more sense. And just that whole book and the recommendations and everything in it just still to this day makes a lot of sense. And to his credit, Jim Radcliffe still does plyos. Like dude is like in his 50s or maybe 60s now at this point. I don't even know. And he still does plyos like multiple times a week. Dude is ripped.
Yeah.
He's just like a freak athlete for his age. And I don't know. I think that says a lot in and of itself. And he's worked with the tippy top track and field athletes. He's worked with some of the best, uh, football players in the country. I think he was their strength coach before they moved on to another guy that ended up like a player ended up dying from heat stroke or like rhabdo or some shit because of it. I don't know if he died. I don't know the exact story. So he's an absolute legend. And I still heavily that was the first textbook I read on training actually. My mom bought it for me. She just found it at like a Barnes and Nobles. My uncle might have recommended it to her because he was a PT at the time. I read it when I was 13 or 14, didn't understand half the words, and I just like looked them all up one by one. Like would say stretch shortening cycle. And I'm like, what the hell is this? What is paramecium? What is like I'll never forget there were different explanations for series elastic components and parallel elastic components. And I could not wrap my head around that as like a 14-year-old. I was like, these words are so complex, but I feel the desire and need to read this because I have to understand it before I do it. So I read the whole book, researched all that stuff. And then each year I would like do, that progression or whatever. I'd do different training. And then I started training with Mike and I'm learning more and more. And it would just always come back to the guidelines around that book. Like it just to this day made so much sense. Even I remember there's a diagram in there. It's a triangle and it has like an overload, just like explanation. At one point it says like spatial overload. And then there's another one that's like metric or something like that. But it's basically like the range of motion, the velocity, and the load, right? So if spatial was like a range of motion, and then it was like the load was how much weight are you doing, And that made a lot of sense to me. And then the velocity, like how fast are you doing it? And another big point that they made is the total impulse, like the height, isn't as important as the ground contact time. Like ground contact times being short was more important. I remember that being a big key component of it. And then as I kind of developed as a coach, I think that that was maybe a little bit biased. Like there's not evidence that necessarily indicates that's the case, but that's always what Jim would advocate for. And I think it's because the time constraints for most athletic movements are going to be less than what you'll see in a plyo. So if you're deciding to err on the side of ground time and jump height, you're gonna fucking be slow. like,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, I have an identical twin brother, saw great results from it. So to this day, that was my first experience, and I still kind of err on the side of a lot of the teachings that I took away from that textbook. So yeah, that's kind of where I fall. What's your
It's
lens on it?
it's crazy our first experiences with plyos were so different. Like I found out about plyos really early on when just Googling how to jump higher, and they always seemed like this mysterious thing that like I wish I would have known about like Google Scholar and that type of thing and like if somebody would have told me like, hey, like they've done research on all this stuff.
Yeah, like
Um
not all evidence is good evidence.
yeah,
Not all information is good information.
because to me it was like, and it's still like this. If you Google how to jump higher, it's basically all market whoever's like the top marketers for jumping pop up, and it's stuff like back in the day it was different people than it is now, but it was these jump programs and articles written by people that don't know that much. But it always seemed like a secret thing. Like it's like, whoa, there's this thing called plyos. I don't know how to use them, which ones to do specifically, but apparently they make you jump higher. Um, so I never did them because I didn't have access to it. It was always behind a paywall, right? Like that information. They're like, hey, this is the secret. Now you got to pay the money to know the secret. Um, and then shortly thereafter, found a book or not a book, a PDF of the Vertical Jump Bible, and he has you do like a test essentially where you like measure your depth jump, you measure your standing vertical, and then you drop off boxes of different heights, and it's to measure like how elastic you are essentially. Did the test, but literally first, so this is like the first time ever doing a depth jump, Achilles tendinopathy. Boom. Like legit first time ever doing it. I probably would have done the program if that wouldn't have happened, but that happened and I was like, well, can't can't do that anymore. Um
Which is
and
crazy
then
because I can't fathom putting that as the very first thing I have someone do. Hey, we're gonna
yeah, like
start you
the
with the
test.
most intense plyo I can think of at
Yeah,
increasing heights. Like
yeah,
what?
yeah, yeah. Uh so that was my first time ever trying a plyometric, aside from obviously the most specific one, which is 2 foot
Jumping.
jumping. Yeah. So at this point, I'm like 16, found out about the dunk world. Initially, I was 15, didn't know pro dunking existed. Then my lens from then on was jumping is a plyo. At traditional plyos are a waste of time. Like that was literally my lens. I'm like, I'm
How
jumping
old were you?
literally 16.
Where did you
Yeah.
hear the jumping? What like how did you
It
you
was
just
like intuition.
intuitively?
Like it was
Wow.
intuition. Like I
That's
knew
good
like
because that was not intuitive to me. Honestly,
yeah,
it
yeah,
was
like to me, it was just like mind you, I had progressed a ton. So it's like I'm progressing a lot, just jumping every day and lifting squats and deadlifts and power cleans essentially. And I love it. That's the other thing is I was having fun and enjoying it. So it's like, why would I do this thing that I feel deep down is not as good? It's not as fun. And I got hurt the first time I tried it. So literally from age 16 up until pretty recently, to be honest, I was just like, there's no point in doing plyos if I'm 2 foot jumping all the time. And that was my lens. And because of that, honestly, I think kind of constrained my learning as a coach. Cause like I never if I saw it as a waste of time, I didn't even like bother learning about it and the mechanisms on why plyos help you and the physiology behind it and stuff. Um, which I think could have helped me a lot as a coach early on and kind of help explain why the 2 foot jumping itself helped. Uh, But yeah, that was my lens for a long, 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 long time. Just crazy because it's like so different from your story.
Yeah. I mean, I improved a lot from doing them. And I've heard this story a number of times. Like Josh Rinker comes to mind. I know he was like me, just did plyos and then jumped higher
Yeah.
and dunked well because of it. And, there's other people like you that just jumped higher. So it definitely seems to be a little bit of a polarizing conversation. And after, being in this for a long time, it's just, I'd always read in that book specifically that plyos are a high injury risk. And I was like, doesn't seem like it. I could do this shit every day and I'd be fine. And then as I've kind of gotten older and more experienced and my outputs have gone up, that's definitely been the case. Like tendinopathy pops up, muscle pulls pop up, specifically like your Achilles. Some of those plyos, like I would do them all the time and have no issue as a kid. But now I'm like, damn, if I did that like cold, my Achilles will hurt super bad. And
Yeah.
I think there's a few newer kind of research articles that are indicating that you can do low level plyos and that they'll load the collagen fibrils, and then the collagen fibrils will load the tenocytes. The tenocytes will produce, collagen matrix, and you can kind of load the central core of the tendon, and there's not like stress shielding. Stress shielding is like where the outside of the tendon is mostly doing the load bearing, similar to if you slap water, it's going to be stiff on the top of the water. I think that stuff, in my experience, intuitively is not necessarily the case. Like, I think jumping in general and loading the tendon in general, whether it's weight room or walking or whatever else, like maybe that changes the collagen like cross sectional area, how much you have. But I just don't necessarily know if it's as concrete as maybe what some of the research has indicated. Like some of my friends that study the Achilles specifically find it incredibly difficult to get meaningful data because you're literally strapping down their heel and then having them push as hard as they can and seeing how much force did it take before we saw the Achilles stretch. Well, there's a couple constraints there, right? One, how are you measuring the length of the Achilles accurately? Are you looking at it? Do you have a MRI? Do you have a ultrasound? And how accurate can you get it? Like what level of accuracy can you get? Because if that strap on your heel stretches more than your Achilles, your data's shit, like it's dog shit.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time that's what you see. And there's other methods for doing it now. Like I think there's more complex methods that I don't fully understand. I think one of the methods, that's more where the research is like finding methods to accurately assess stress and strain of the tendon, because all the data is dog shit until we do that. And to my understanding, there is a newer method, but it's very, very, very difficult and expensive. Shout out Gasper. Backstory: Gasper was a high jumper from Estonia. We connected via Elite Track when I was like 15. He was a freaking beast in the weight room and stuff. I think he maybe jumped 205 in high jump, and we both love the event and are both obsessed with it. But he researches tendons and the patella and Achilles, and he's like the expert on that stuff right now, and has looked at some of the. I think he's the one that's pioneering with maybe like a German researcher, the best way to collect data on stress strain, and that's like how much force did it take to deform this tendon. So shout out to Gasper. But to my knowledge, what he told me last was one, time is really important. Two, the type of muscle contraction doesn't really matter when it comes to like the tendon. And so whether it's an eccentric contraction, isometric, concentric, doesn't matter. It just matters how much force is going through the tendon. And that's going to determine how much and what the stress and strain is. And I think we used to think like, oh, if you do an eccentric contraction, like the tendon will lengthen and it's better and all this other bullshit. I don't even know. But how this all comes back to plyos is obviously plyos are largely, your success is determined by your tendon properties. So like you're rebounding against the ground, your muscles are really stiff, your tendons are stretching and, shortening and releasing a lot of energy as the muscle also contracts. And yeah, I think it really is a high risk activity. I think a lot of people underestimate that. It's high risk on your back. It's high risk on your, joints and cartilage. It's high risk on your tendons. And if you're playing a lot of basketball and stuff, it's just like it's going to come at a cost. So I'm currently playing around with implementing them really slowly. One thing that wasn't in that book that I read, as a young stuff, was doing a progression with drops. right? Like it had drops in there, but not as concretely as the progression is now for me, which is like you got to make sure you can store energy. How they would set it up is they do multiple or single response, multiple response with pause, and then multiple response. A response is just a rep. So single response would be like, and he always had like the desirable dozen. So it was like 12 exercises that you have to master. 6 of them were sprint oriented, 6 of them were jump oriented. So I think the sprint one was like, it went from like a gallop was one of them. And then it was prancing. Prancing was like alternating 2 foot to 2 foot. And then the next one was a speed skip. So it was like literally an A skip, but like covering distance with really fast changes of direction with your legs. There was a ankling. So it was like baby bounding, kind of more or less. And then I think it ended up working into actual like bounding or something like that. I think that was the progression. Don't quote me on that, but it was something along those lines. And then the vertical ones were like pogos, which are stiffness hops. So that was like the first one, which is crazy because I would put that at the end of the continuum. It's like the most intense thing on the Achilles, and galloping was really intense on the Achilles. And then he did butt or knee tuck jumps, butt kick jumps. And then there was, if you have that book, I would be really curious to see like what it was. But I think it was
Yeah.
pogos, butt kick jump, knee
I
tuck
have the
jump.
PDF actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Can you send me that? Do you purchased that obviously?
Yeah.
So, but I think there was like a couple more. Maybe it was like a single leg hurdle hop. So you would like jump, land, jump, land, jump, land over like cones. That was like another one of the desirable dozen. There might have been 2 more. Obviously, if it was a dozen, there were 2 more because I only listed 4. Maybe bounding was one of like it was it was bounding for distance maybe, and then bounding for height, or speed bounding was maybe how it worked. But yeah, I really there was a skip for height maybe, and there was like a bleacher hop, I think is what it was. You like move down the bleachers. But regardless, I really liked the progression. I thought it was super effective. He had a ton of creative upper body plyos in there. And yeah, I think the movement, specifically like straight ahead, 1 foot jumping, sprinting, I think
Yeah.
the plyos made a lot of sense. And but the loads were crazy, right? Like even repeat hurdle hops or like knee tuck jumps, you're basically doing hurdle hops. Hurdle hops are like the most intense plyo. So that's like one of the desirable dozen. And it's so every single program you had to have that proficiency, but that's a very difficult box to check. Like that's a very difficult thing to do for people. Even our athletes, I've seen people struggle with it. Same thing with galloping. Like I've never made you do those exercises because you would die and you have 50.5 inch vertical. I would say you're more than proficient. So
Yeah.
it's definitely like a continuum. The better you are at plyos, the higher risk it is, right? And the more intense it is. Whereas if you're a
Yeah.
kid, your forces are a lot lower. You can handle doing those a lot more. So like for most of our guys and they're 18 to 45, I don't do many of these exercises. 1, because they look weird as hell. 2, because they're probably going to do them wrong. And 3, because the risk is so high for them. Like I'd rather them do drops and jump and sprint like that. I went and bound. I really like bounding as well. So maybe some skips of some sorts. I don't. One that Matt Watson does is a lot of like the double dip. I like those, but I think sometimes it adds like too many steps, which I don't always like. So I'm very careful about programming them. With high jumpers, I do a lot more actual takeoffs, like kind of traditional jump circuits, which also Jim Radcliffe talked about, like a jump combine, standing long jump, standing triple jump, right, left, 4 stride, 4 bound, for distance, like where are you at, stuff like that. I have a lot of my track guys do that, but for dunkers, almost never. It's kind of
Yeah. I
irrelevant.
mean, we jump too much.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
I
I'll
have kind
probably
of
have
like
you
a
do
checklist.
plyos eventually, but not anytime soon.
Yeah. Like I for so my lens has changed in that I do think they're very effective, but there's kind of a checklist that I have to cross off before I can benefit from them. And it's like, one, that I do a lot of that I periodize the training leading up to it. So that I do, the hypertrophy work, that I get stronger. Am I really fit when I'm going into it? Second is, am I healthy? Third, drop off the dunking volume a lot. Like I have to drop that off. And then once those check boxes are checked, that's kind of like when I have benefited from it.
Do you think
Um,
you getting older has changed your lens on it too, or like age is a relevant kind of thing or aspect of it, or no?
Um, kind of. I think I actually have benefited from it now more, but I think it's because my training and health is better now. Like before, like I
When
think
you say
I think
before, what do you mean? Like when you were
like
younger? Before
before
me?
2019, like before I started training with you essentially. Um I think I could have benefited if I had, but I just needed good training.
Like
Implement.
balanced training.
Yeah, yeah. Like even I'm not gonna say the jump program. The jump program I was doing before, it had plyos, but we didn't check off the load management checkbox
So
and and the tendon health.
your
Yeah.
knees were just fucked.
And at that point, I literally made a video this morning about how we program and how we do a needs analysis. And like the first question is like, how are you feeling? How's your body feeling? And nobody that ever trained me ever asked me that. It was just like, here's a program, go and do it. We don't know about that knee pain stuff. Oh, I don't feel knee pain. Like,
I'm real happy that I could have integrated that into your life of like, hey man, how's your day going? Man? How's your knee feeling? It hurts bad. Well, shit. That's
yeah.
gonna be a real big determinant in my experience.
That's always like step one. You're gonna improve the most. That's the lowest hanging fruit by just addressing that. Like,
Yeah.
get to the point where you can actually train hard, jump hard.
Quincy the other day when he was on the call and he was talking about that, and he was like, "Yeah, dude, I'm like dunking every single time. I'm doing two-handers now super easily. Like, what's next?" And it was like, that's crazy because he was so bad, he like could
His
not
knees were
jump at all.
fucked up.
They were
Like,
so bad. And it was just like, dude, if we just get you healthy and jumping somewhat regularly and you're patient, you're gonna be successful. And
yeah.
I think that's hard for people though. That's a tough pill to swallow is, training is not the issue. It's you've overtrained. Training is
It's
training
bro,
harder. Training harder is not the answer. Being
it's
patient is the
easy.
answer.
Yeah. I think I keep seeing this quote. I think it's Verkhoshansky, and it's like any fool can make someone feel tired or something like that. Like any fool can make a workout where you get tired, like and bury somebody. And it's
Fucking
kind
love
of like on the
it.
same continuum. Any fool can make a highly complex training plan with the most cutting edge exercises and all that stuff. But it's that load management piece that
Yeah.
people are missing.
Can you keep them healthy though and do that? No.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's
Cool.
why I'm gonna toot our own horn. It's like we have been coach how long have you been coaching for now?
Like, are you saying formally an athlete works with me one on one
Yeah,
or more than one on one?
yeah,
Uh, the first athlete, I mean, I probably started helping people when I was like 14, but I would say like actually running a full program for someone that
yeah,
someone was doing. I was 18, 18,
yeah.
19.
So we're
So
19,
more
so
than
it's
10
like
years,
10
12
plus
years.
years. Yeah, 10 plus years. We started doing the tendon rehab stuff in 2018, so it's about to be 7 years since that. It's like 6, 7 years. So we've been coaching guys specifically through tendon health and how to balance that with like the good jump training, the fun stuff for so long that like people miss that. Like people don't understand. Like they don't understand how many guys with obscure ass injuries and stuff like that we've had
What do you
to
mean people
coach
miss
with.
that? Like our competitors
Like
or like,
people, yeah, yeah, like other coaches and stuff like that. Like they don't understand dunkers to the extent that we do. Like the
no,
amount
yeah,
of pounding
definitely not.
dunkers take on their knees and bodies. We
It's
realized that
like
when
Chuck
we
says, they're just them boys are pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding,
yeah, yeah.
something like that.
Like, but it's pretty cool though. Like on the plyometric topic, like it's insane what dunking has created. It's like a perfect storm of high intensity and then addiction to
Oh
where like
yeah,
it just produces freaks. Like
yeah. It's almost. I
it's
mean,
literally
it's
like the
kind of
perfect
bad.
plyo. Like
It's kind of bad though. Like it is. I mean,
it
I
is. I
like
mean, it's a
plyos.
gift and a
I would
curse.
have done them more. I would have done them more. But the book was like, you shouldn't do them more, and I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
Like
think the smart way to do it.
jumping.
I mean, you look at high jump training, like when we were watching it, and it was like, the amount of like actual jumps at a bar those guys take versus dunkers max effort jumping is so much different.
Like, how many jumps do you think those high jumpers took? Which one are you talking about? The Polish guy or the Swedish guy?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh, what's
yeah.
his name? I'm gonna ask. What's his name? Patrick
It's like
Soderberg.
it's
Soderberg.
like, dude, I was taking 100 jumps at a hoop at intensity, like, 4 times a week. So I was doing, like, 4 to 500 jumps, 4 to 600 jumps probably per
Holy
week.
shit!
Like like, I so with that in mind, it's like, yeah, I think plyos are good, and but it's like most dunkers are just it's hard to fit, and it's hard to find, like, someone that's disciplined and get them to stop to the point where they can do those plyos.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, I also my lens with it was I integrated a lot of like fatigue constrained plyos when I was with Mike. So you'd have a lot of circuits and stuff like that. Truly, rarely do
Yeah,
you have like a dedicated plyo. So like I've been building them in place of the sprint work because similar to Verkoshansky, they're like it's too cold. We have to run in hallway. This is why we make depth jump, bounding exercises, special strength exercise. Like we don't have access to track, we can't run, we can't jump, we do in place jump. Like
yeah,
that's similar to what I do. I'm just like, all right, well, I got 20 yards. Like that's
yeah,
it. I can't do an acceleration. I can't do like at that time it was like, oh, you have fancy high knee run. We don't have very much space. You need to run fast. We cannot do these. So we lift weight. We do plyos. And similar thing I'm kind of doing is like I'm bleeding them in place of the sprints that I would otherwise have done. But it's very carefully. Like I am very slow to integrate drops. I'm very slow to integrate, um, like anything where it's a storage and release type plyo because I've experienced a lot of tendon injuries or tendon like flare ups, especially in
yeah,
college, from just throwing plyos at myself, kind of like haphazardly.
yeah.
So I definitely listen to my body with them, and that would be a big piece of advice I would tell people is like, if you can handle more, do more. It's just that most times you can't. Like, especially if you're doing
Mhm.
them correctly. Like if I threw you off a 70-inch box and had you jump vertically, it's going to come at a cost. Your shins, your knees, your hips, your joints, like not even just the tendons, but your joints. I'm talking the pounding that happens of your bones banging together because your muscles are pulling so intensely, so quickly on the bone, on the tendon, and then pulls on the bone, and then that yanks the bone into the other bone really fucking hard. Like that comes at a cost, and you can't do that all the time. Same way that you can't jump all the time. Plyos, you can dial up the intensity way more. I can, you're limited to a 50-inch drop when you jump. Let's make it 70. Let me throw you on. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know how high you dropped. That was like 5 feet, dude. It was like literally.
Mhm.
It might have been
It was,
6 feet. Insane.
60, I think. I think it was 60.
Yeah, like and you rebounded. It wasn't just a landing,
Yeah.
which is insane. That's like
So, yeah,
jumping
it
50
they
inches
have
and then landing and jumping again.
that's where I think plyos help, like, that like, to answer that, like, of, like, your vertical jump, it's like when you can overload it past what you could normally do on a regular approach, that's when it's like, it gets scary in a good way.
Yeah, well, that's whenever I feel pain.
Yeah.
I'm like, I struggle to handle a normal takeoff, and then I'm like, let me just go ahead and like I always go by sensations too. That's the other thing I've realized is when I'm doing plyos now, it's like, okay, that didn't feel like as intense as a takeoff. So I'm gonna increase the height, or I'm gonna increase the way I push, or I'm gonna change the way that I land. Like there's so many different ways to do plyos. Some coaches will say roll through the heel. Some coaches will say land on the ball of the foot. Some coaches will say land on the toes. Some coaches will say land behind the foot. Like you can change each of those variables and get a different response in the tendon that you're looking at, right? Like I don't really cue you on drops. I just say hit the ground as it hits you, jump as high as you can. I don't say land on your heel. I don't say land on your toe. I don't say land on the ball of your foot. I'll usually put a target out for you and just say drop off this, hit the ground before it hits you, get a rebound. That's it. Like that's the only
Yeah,
cue I'll use. And but for me, if my Achilles is fucked up, maybe I'll land full foot. Or if my knees are fucked up, maybe I'll land more on the ball of the foot. Or if I want a more reactive sprint based one, I'm going to land just behind the ball of my foot. If I
mhm,
want a jump based one, I'm just gonna go for height and rebounding. And sometimes honestly, it's like, oh, the more I feel my knee, the more specific it feels, which is a horrible cue. But for some reason, that is true. Oh, it's not for some reason, it makes sense. And so I have to do it in very small volumes, and things like that. But yeah, I think that all said, it's a good place for us to to close this out. I know tomorrow we're supposed to talk about tendons, but we kind of cover that. Maybe we won't. We'll kind of do a deep dive on that maybe tomorrow. But if you guys are interested in getting coaching, go to THPStrength.com. We're obviously really good at this. We love what we do. We want to make you guys better. And if you are someone that loves training and you are about the work, you like putting the work in, you like working hard and seeing it pay off, definitely sign up. You are our type of person. If you're someone that's like, I just want to take a pill and everything's easy and better, don't sign up. Like
THP is really hard.
Yeah, it's not easy. So you got to love training. It has to be a part of your day and it has to be a part of your lifestyle. And you have to love jumping high and showing out. And it's fun. Yeah, I don't know. It's just amazing. I love it. Anyways, we'll see you guys tomorrow.